Weights and Downer. You or someone you know has lost the ability to earn a living because someone put the company interests before their well-being. In times like these, there's one firm who has handled hundreds of catastrophic and lost earning cases. Before you settle fast with a company's attorney, give Weights and Downer a call. 985-876-0870. Weights and Downer. Let us fight for your rights.
And welcome back, everyone, to Bayou Time. I'm Martin Falls, joined by the District Attorney of Terrebonne Parish, Mr. Joe Waits. There he is, right here on the set. Good to see you, Mr. DA.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you for having us here.
Good. Also, we have two assistant district attorneys. We have Chris Ernie right next to the DA, and we have Dennis Elford, both handling a big trial that took place here in Terrebonne Parish. And Mr. Waits, this was a big one for y'all to prosecute, wasn't it?
No doubt, because it had a very horrible factual scenario. It touched our community at the core, and it really, you don't expect something like this to happen in Terrebonne Parish with a murder for hire. And it's just, it's the victims are good people to have this happen to, and it's just, it cuts you at the center.
Yeah. Let's do this. This was, I guess was this sort of like a typical law school kind of playbook kind of situation that played out pretty well? We'll go to Chris Ernie to maybe give us a little bit of what took place in the courtroom, and also Dennis Halford on that too. But what exactly, explain to the audience from ground level what we were dealing with here.
So we were dealing with a man who had been charged, and this is really his aspect. We had a man who had been charged with rape in another parish, in Vermilion Parish. The victim of that rape was his niece, a lady by the name of Chelsea Bork, who was 16 years old at the time. I think that was in 2019. And this man had been to jail before and did not want to go back to jail. At some point, got his friend, a guy named Andrew Eskine, and another guy, Dalvin Wilson, to try to get rid of her. That was, in quotes, get rid of her. That's what they wanted to do, to eliminate her from testifying. Because if she's not around to testify, then there's no way that a DA in that parish could go forward with that rape case. And that was the background of all this, and that was the motive that was established in this particular case. He would have been facing numerous years in addition to possibly being charged as a habitual offender if he was ever convicted of that rape case. So the murder happened in January of 2021, where Mr. Wilson, Dalvin Wilson, who's already been convicted, but Dennis tried that case and convicted him. And he came into Montague, Louisiana, and broke into the house and saw where Hope Nettleton, who was a neighbor right across the street, happened to come over and killed her and Brittany Comier. And then it left in a panic and realized that at some point he killed the wrong person. The one he was supposed to kill was Chelsea Bork, who was still in the house at the time, hiding in a closet along with her friend who happened to be there as well. And it was a tragic situation all the way around. And at some point they realized they killed the wrong person. Yeah. I'll let Dennis talk about that.
So Dennis, you've been handling this really from different aspects, but like Mr. Waite said, this is very unusual, but it's not shocking. We've seen some pretty horrific crimes here in the parish, but this was a little different.
Unfortunately, it is not shocking. It was definitely an unusual case. It's something that you normally don't see here in Terrebonne Parish, this whole murder for hire scenario. I think one of the detectives involved says this is something you see more out of Hollywood. And like Chris said, our office had tried the previous defendant, that being the actual shooter, about 14 or 15 months ago. That case was more of a traditional type of murder prosecution, that being that he was the actual trigger person. He's the person that went into the house. He's the person who actually did the physical killing. it's not often that we handle a case like this where the individual who was on trial for murder, in effect, did not actually commit the actual act. Mr. Comier, who went to trial, was actually about 150 miles away when the incident took place. Mr. Wilson's trial was more traditional. Mr. Cormier's trial was unusual. And this is where I want to throw out a big thanks to the sheriff's office. There were two detectives that handled this case primarily, Ryan Trosclair and Travis Sanford. Those guys, they're relatively young still, but I know that when they went through their training with the academy, they were more in tune with handling and investigating a case, much like we did with Mr. Wilson. That being, you have a crime scene, you have an individual who you thought may be the suspect, and in return, you gather the evidence to handle that type of case. This case was different. This case involved telephone records. This case involved data from a telephone. It involved GPS. It involved a car computer. It involved all of those things that those guys put in tireless hours to educate themselves, to get certified, to be able to understand exactly what they were looking at. And in turn, through their hard work, they are the true heroes in this case. They
So
are
if
the
this
ones
was a
that did
case
this.
we wouldn't have seen 30 years ago on this same set, we wouldn't have had all the technology to bring it to fruition.
You would not have seen this 5 years ago. The fact that the phone, one of the subject phones that became critical in this case, didn't get dumped until about 18 months after the incident itself because we didn't have the technology to do it. This case, had it been tried 3 or 4 years ago, would have been tremendously different because we would not have had the technology or the capability to do it. It's a little bit like CSI comes to Houma. I'm not telling you that every case deserves the CSI treatment because most cases are the traditional murder case. This one, however, needed it. And through the efforts of those two guys, we managed to bring it to a successful conclusion.
All right, let's do this. We'll take a short break. We'll come back. I want to give more time to this story. It's a big story, and Mr. Waits and his staff have done a great job over the years of prosecuting these high criminal cases. We'll be right back with more on this case right here in Terrebonne Parish.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Terrebonne General Health System. Your health is our legacy. Rouse's, you're either local or you're not. Buick, the craft of modern luxury. St. Martin and Bork, know your rights.
All right, we're back talking about a big trial that took place here in Terrebonne Parish last week in Judge Randy L. Bethencourt's courtroom. And of course, it has a lot of different aspects of it. One of the aspects that they were just talking about was the fact that communications was a vital part of it. So I want to go to the district attorney at this point. We heard Dennis talk about, 3 to 5 years ago, this wouldn't have happened if it had been further back. But y'all even pull people in from out of town. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, as Dennis was saying, the communication and the big defense in this case was that we couldn't hook up any connection between Mr. Comier and the shooter, Mr. Wilson, and there would be absolutely no communication whatsoever. Well, what they don't know that we were prepared. We flew in the AT&T lady, the records custodian, to establish the number of phone calls that occurred between all three of these gentlemen. 3 crucial ones which occurred the night of the homicide. So it was important that we establish that, and that it took a lot of effort to get this lady from New York all the way here to come testify in Houma, Louisiana, to establish the communication, which these two gentlemen did, and they did it in a very excellent manner. So it was we pulled out all the plugs to make this conviction happen.
I bet when she walked in and started that dissertation that you could hear a pin drop on the other side. First, let me mention this. Dennis and Chris, y'all were in there and monitoring everything, but how can a hit for hire man walk in and missed the target unless they just were totally unorganized or just doing things under duress or whatever. It baffles me.
Well, I think the way the facts played out is that the individual, the shooter, didn't know this family. And what is important is that Mr. Comier, who was the individual that was tried last week, was actually the brother and the niece of the intended victims. But the shooter, Mr. Wilson, who he hired to do this, had never met these individuals. The fact that he had never met this individual or these individuals caused some of the confusion in the house, actually. And in addition to that, there was even testimony that when he went into the house, he actually called for one of the victims by the wrong name because he had never met them. He might have seen a picture. Mr. Comier had described the house and where it was located in detail to him, but he had never actually interacted with any of the individuals he ultimately
Has he
shot.
killed before? Because to go in there and shoot somebody execution style, to me, that's very difficult to do. But had he been in trouble before?
He had some things on his record in terms of some weapons charges. There was also an undercurrent throughout the trials, both trials. They had some drug use, but nothing as violent as a murder. There was some testimony, at least that was attempted to come out, that indicated, well, maybe he did not intend to do that. But I would tell you, if you place a gun to somebody's head and you do what he did, and then tried to hunt down those other two victims, I would suggest to you that he definitely intended to do what he wanted
Yeah, has
to.
no conscience. Chris, you were telling me that Miss Nettleton just happened to be visiting the neighbors that she wasn't supposed to be there, right?
That's correct. They were friendly, and in fact, Miss Brittany Comier, the other victim, and her husband Donovan Martin were actually moving the next day to go to Mississippi. That's why there wasn't hardly any furniture in most of the house. It had already been packed up. They were fixing to leave, and Miss Nettleton had just happened to come across and have saying goodbyes, discussions, and that kind of stuff. Miss you, whatever, that kind of. Because they were friendly, they were friends, and it happened to be, and I guess it was after 10 o'clock at night or somewhere around that time, and which kind of added to the confusion of the shooter, as well as Miss Comier was very young looking, and perhaps in the fog of the confusion and the excitement, that could have added to the confusion of Mr. Wilson shooting the wrong person.
And Mr. Waits, let's talk about it, because you've seen now, you've been district attorney for a long number of years now. You've seen a lot of things come through. But what makes a person, first of all, they commit one crime, then they're trying to make sure the witness is killed so they don't talk about them and get them convicted. But to go from point A to point B to point C at the trial in Terrebonne Parish, what kind of person are we talking about here that can actually do that to a niece, then try to kill his niece? And it blows my mind.
It goes a step further than that, Martin. Not only did he kill his own sister and try to wipe out this victim and potential witness in his rape trial, but he killed his own sister and stood in her funeral as a pallbearer 3 days later.
I just said
That's the type of person you're dealing with. There's no conscience here whatsoever. And I just need to congratulate these two gentlemen. They're veteran prosecutors for the district attorneys. They've been with me since the inception, and they did a phenomenal job in presenting this rather difficult case. But they put it together. They painted a picture. The jury obviously understood and came back with a very quick verdict. So I think the jury had no doubt in their mind that these two guys had proven their case beyond a reasonable doubt, and felt like Mr. Comier did exactly what we claimed.
As we go to the break, you just reminded me, I remember us covering the news story about him standing in the wedding. It blows my mind. What we'll do, let's take a break. We'll come back, and I want to give him one more segment. Very important case here in the parish in Judge Randy Bethencourt's courtroom. And I'll let him tell me a little bit more about the actual things that went on in the courtroom and what it was like if you were in that courtroom last week. We'll be right back.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by South Louisiana Bank. It's better when we bank together. Waits and Downer, attorneys at law. Terrebonne Ford. Built Ford tough.
All right, we're back with the District Attorney of Terrebonne Parish, Joe Waits. We also have the Assistant District Attorneys, Dennis Alford and Chris Ernie. They're both here. Let's start up, before I get to Mr. Waits and the sentencing, let's go to Mr. Ernie. Let's talk about some of the things that took place in the courtroom as you saw it.
Well, one of the things was a little bit unusual, not that we don't always see, is that the defendant himself chose to testify in this case. And I had the opportunity to cross him, and we needed to establish, what his positions were. And he denied everything. Denied knowing, despite all the overwhelming evidence of the relationship with Andrew Escon, who Dennis will talk about him in a minute, as well as with Dalvin Wilson. He denied ever making phone calls to Dalvin Wilson prior to the night of the murder. We had established that phone calls were made to Dalvin on the night of the murder, close in time, actually, in fact, to the murder itself. But he said, that was just coincidence. And he said, I've never talked to that guy. I've hired him, but I'd always call somebody else to do some painting and stuff like that. And we made him commit to that. And then lo and behold, it came out that he had made well over 100 phone calls from November through December.
So he was brazen enough to get on the stand.
Oh yeah, he was, and no remorse, no nothing, anything like that. Just very narcissistic human being. We caught him in a couple of other lies, and that's what we did. And I was able to establish certain things that Dennis was able to bring Detective Trosclair up and follow up to indicate, no, this is what he lied about. So
let's talk about when you're listening to that, Dennis, and of course when Chris is doing his thing, what was going through your mind? Like, when did you know you really had him?
Well, you never really know that you have him until the very end, right? But at the same time, as the trial developed, we definitely felt pretty good about what was being developed. I think at one point in time, Chris and I discussed it and said, this is about as good as it's going to get, because we felt the testimony was coming out really well. One of the things that we were planning for was that what we have not talked about so far is there was actually a third defendant, and his name was Andrew Escon. Mr. Escon was friends with Mr. Wilson, who was a shooter, as well as Mr. Comier, who was the essentially the mastermind in this. Mr. Escon actually testified in the trial, and basically what Mr. Escon told us or confessed was that this was not the first time that they had been down to Houma to do this. There had been a scouting trip sometime in the summer where Mr. Comier and Mr. Escon and Mr. Wilson had actually come out and scoped out the house. Had sat outside one night, I think sometime in July or sometime during the summer of 2020, and were watching the house to make sure that these two guys who had never been to Houma knew exactly where it was. There was a failed attempt that was done by Mr. Wilson, who was the ultimate shooter, and Mr. Escon sometime in November, where they actually attempted to come and do the killings. They came during the middle of the night one night in November, attempted to break into the house, could not get into the house. And of course, as a result of that unsuccessful attempt, Mr. Comier was not happy, which finally led us to that fateful night in January 13th of 2021, when Mr. Wilson came down here alone, managed to get into the house and effectively kill the two victims that we had in this case and threatened the third.
Mr. Waits, let's talk about the sentencing aspect of this. What's the plan at this point?
The plan is we have currently a date in May with some post-trial motions, and the sentencing will be shortly thereafter. The sentencing will be life in prison for the rest of their lives on one count of first degree, one count of second, and one count of attempt. So Mr. Comier is gone. He is done. And I just want to share one thing. I think it's very important that I point this out, because Mr. Ernie did an excellent job in establishing that in Mr. Comier's guilt. He established that they made a big deal in the trial that, oh, he was found not guilty of this, of the rape, blah, blah, blah. Well, he was found not guilty because of a legal technicality, but Chris did an excellent job getting him to admit on the stand that he, in fact, committed carnal knowledge. It admitted to this improper sexual relationship with this young girl. So I think the jury saw through that, and because they made an opening, it was a big old deal. He's found not guilty, all this smoke and mirrors, and it turned out he did an awesome job, and I just wanted to point that
If
out.
you're capable of carnal knowledge, you're capable of everything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
Well, carnal knowledge with your niece, your biological
Right.
niece. And it was, I didn't bring this out, but it was actually probably an incest charge as well, because it fit the statute.
Just
But,
real quick,
yeah.
Judge Bethencourt, it's not his first trial. Always, I know the judges don't want to be mentioned a lot, but how did it go with him? You felt like he just let the facts come out pretty easily?
So Judge Bethencourt handled the initial trial with Mr. Wilson, as well as handled this case. Judge Bethencourt has had several terms up there. He's no stranger to these type of significant cases. He did an excellent job in terms of the controlling the courtroom. I think it's fair to say that it got heated in there a couple of times, but Judge Bethencourt handled it and managed to keep decorum correct, and we got the result that we wanted.
Yeah, because I would imagine it would get heated when you're talking about somebody who could put a gun to somebody's forehead or have them do it and the trigger's pulled. I imagine when your freedom's on the line, anything can go.
I got to say before we run out of time, Dennis was the director of this. I was the assistant director. And this is the first time we actually tried a case together in all of our years. And it felt natural. It felt great. I was honored to be in there and help Dennis in this case. And we worked really well together.
All right, thank y'all. Mr. Waits, congratulations, junior team. Doing a great job. Some more bad people.
Very proud of him, Martin.
Yeah, more bad people gone away for a long time. There you have it. There's the facts of the case last week in Terrebonne Parish. We'll keep you posted. When the sentencing comes around, we'll have another segment, keep you up to speed. Take care, everybody.
Today's social media segment is brought to you by Alford and Associates for all of your insurance needs. CIS, Cardiovascular Institute of the South, the highest quality cardiovascular care available. Barker Honda, the Barker family tradition of quality.